Big warm round of applause for Pete Peterson.
Thank you, thank you. It is great to be here at NCDD. The last time I was on a stage here was Austin in 2010. Some of you might remember I was on a panel entitled Conservatives in Public Engagement, and I was forced to sit to the right next to the rather fidgety Grover Norquist. And so sharing a stage now with Carolyn, I feel a lot more comfortable, I can tell you. So what we're going to be talking about today are our experiences at the Davenport Institute in helping to build civic infrastructure at the local level. My experiences come from the consulting work that we've done in projects throughout the state of California, and particularly the training work that John mentioned that we've carried out not only in California, particularly for public sector officials, but also for elected leaders and civic leaders throughout the country. So let's get to it. The agenda for today's talk, I want to begin with describing what I consider to be a quiet revolution in local government and local governance. Secondly, take a look at local government masochists and define what that is, and maybe some people that you're interacting with. Next, I want to look at the related subject of the irony of public engagement. Next, the concepts that we have found really resonate in talking about these public processes with public sector officials. And finally, ending with what I think is an incredible story about what's happening in a small but famous Los Angeles area city. So are we ready to go? We fired up? Ready to go? I just wanted to see what that felt like. So let's take a look at what the quiet revolution in leadership is, and I'm going to begin by breaking the #1 rule of PowerPoint, and that is to give you a text-saturated slide. But I think it's really important to get a sense from, on the ground, the voice of a local official, in this case Dave Knapp, who was the city manager of Cupertino, California, the home of Apple. He is now working in the same position in Highland Park, Illinois. This was a response that he gave to the late and very great Dr. Barnett Pierce in a study that he conducted called Connecting the Role of Government. And I want to put this up there and just read it through. I think it describes what's beginning to happen at the local government level. This is what Dave said. He's been in local government now for 30 years. It used to be that if you did something, you had to tell the public about it. And then it became, if you are planning to do something, you have to tell them about it. And then it became, if you are planning to do something, you have to offer them an opportunity to come in and say what they want to say. You don't have to do anything about it, but you have to give them the opportunity to come and have input. The model now is when you have an issue, you are better off to have the community weigh in on the definition of the problem, the possible solutions to the problem, and to actually affect the outcome of the decisions process. Now, I could point out dozens of local officials, at least in California and increasingly around the country, that have had decades of experience in local government, and they share this very same feeling. Something is changing in the relationship between our local governing institutions and our government officials. So let's take a look at another lens through which we can evaluate what I'm calling, again, this quiet revolution in municipal leadership. These are the major 3 conferences in local government and academic policy this year. First, the 2012 National League of Cities Conference, which is upcoming next month in Boston. 1/3 of the leadership training courses offered at the National League of Cities Conference, and these are mostly elected officials at the local level, 1/3 of the leadership training courses involve public engagement in one way, shape, or form. The 2012 International City Management Conference, it was just last week. I was there in Phoenix. We were offering one of our half-day training programs there. The 2012 ICMA conference, engaging citizens was actually an entire education track in and of itself. And 1/3 of the university workshops, which are the workshops that precede the conference, related in some way to public processes, whether online or face-to-face. Earlier this year, the 2012 ASPA Conference, which is the American Society of Public Administration. This is the national gathering of all the major public administration schools in the country. The title of the conference itself was Redefining Public Service Through Civic Engagement. And increasingly, and Davenport at Pepperdine isn't the only one, There are an increasing number of institutes at universities around the country that are doing this kind of work, and more courses are being taught, particularly in schools of public administration and public policy. Our future leaders, especially in local government, are getting coursework in this area. So I want to go down to ground level and take a look at what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I want to pull some data points from a recent survey conducted by the National League of Cities. And this is what I would call the good. This was a survey conducted again by National League of Surveys in 2010. Their survey report, which I recommend you reading if you haven't seen it, Making Local Democracy Work. It was a survey of over 3,000 local government officials from all over the country, and these were their responses to these statements and questions. Indicate how likely your city government is to set up some sort of deliberative process to engage the public. On zoning or land use, 82% of the respondents said likely or very likely. 76% said likely or very likely they would engage their residents on budgets. Now the bad and the ugly. To the statement, public engagement processes typically attract mostly the same people who complain or promote their favorite solutions. 81% agreed or strongly agreed. To the question, does your city have the skills, training, and experience they need in order to do effective, deliberative public engagement? Almost half said they didn't have those capabilities. This last data point is derived from the training work that we've done. Again, we've had over 500 public sector officials come through our trainings over the last several years. We do a little popcorn question about when we say the phrase, the public, what is the first word that comes into your mind? 75 to 80% of the responses we get back from elected and administrative officials are negative. Negative attitudes toward the public. Words like NIMBY, stupid, narrow-minded, uninformed, single issue. So this is a statement that I use, given this tension, right? I'm hoping you're feeling a tension in this room between public sector officials that know they have to engage the public, but actually not liking the public they have to engage. So this is a slide we use in all of the training work we do, and I simply ask the public sector officials that are there, are public officials masochists? Now, unless you get this dynamic, you don't get what's happening in the local government level around issues of public processes. But there are very good reasons why these public sector officials are, in fact, acting masochistically. It's what I call the ironies of public participation. The first, the processes by which our governing institutions engage residents invite confrontation and a lack of thoughtful, deliberative public engagement. Secondly, and the most important bullet point of this slide, processes meant to engender collaboration often create fear. I want to rest on this point for a second. There are a lot of people that have had very contentious relationships with their local governments in this room. I am here to tell you, and this is based on hundreds of people, public sector officials going through our training, if you don't get that one of the real problems that public sector officials have in engaging the public is they're coming from a place of fear based very legitimately on past bad experiences with engaging the public, we're never going to move this field forward. And unless we can understand and come collaboratively to these local government officials, understanding the fear that is very well founded based on bad processes, we will not move forward. So what are some hurdles that we can jump to help these public sector officials engage public at a local level? Number one, public engagement cannot, does not, will not ever happen at a regular board or committee meeting. What we are talking about here are parallel public processes that are meant to improve and enable more efficient, more effective public council and public committee meetings. Public comment is not public engagement. I understand that it's something regulated and something that city councils have to do. But unless we're able to broaden the understanding of what public engagement can be, we will not move forward. 3 minutes at a microphone and a public hearing are not public engagement. Finally, answering the too expensive takes too long. Very obvious objections that you get from public sector officials: this will take too long and it's going to cost too much money. Answer to those two questions or statements is yes it will and yes it will. But compared to what? There are a lot of different ways to solve public policy problems in this country, folks. There are lawsuits, there are ballot boxes, there are recalls. And a decision made that this is going to take too long or cost too much money, unless it's set in the context of another way that this problem could be solved, that we're not going to get an openness to solving public problems. So many of the projects that we get brought in to consult on, we're only there because every other route to solving this problem has failed. And it's been out of sheer exhaustion that a city manager or a water district board general manager says, you know, that public engagement stuff might just be crazy enough to work because we've done everything else and it hasn't worked. So a couple concepts that resonate. One is, and this everybody in this room knows this, the spectrum, but it's important in communicating with public sector officials that they understand that public engagement is not one thing. It is a spectrum of processes that can move very legitimately from informing the public to do something that's more collaborative or participatory. Related to that is that your purpose determines your process. From room design to whether you hire a facilitator, all the kind of how questions are related directly to answering that first spectrum question. And in consulting with public sector officials, they need to answer and have that answered across the enterprise. Why are they doing this? Also, some concepts that resonate. What I call the X-Files of leadership. This is something that we talk about in our training quite a bit. Is it possible that the experts on this specific policy issue, whether budget related or land use related, does not work for City Hall? Is it possible that there are engineers, architects, and planners that don't work for City Hall? Is it possible that there are financial experts that live in your city and don't work for City Hall? Having them have the ability, and we've seen this happen in some amazing processes, very complex ones around water, where we've had environmental scientists show up at a water district convened public process in which they've offered ideas the water district never thought of. And unless they had hosted or enabled a public process, they never would have heard from these people. So helping to have public sector officials be open to this to gain the wisdom of their community. Customers and citizens, this is the major issue that a lot of public sector officials have with public processes, is when they've engaged the public in the past, they do not see co-creating citizens, they see angry customers. And they come to government saying, I've paid my taxes, you need to give me X. And unless we create processes that push back, I heard a phrase used in one of the panels this morning, if there is some reciprocal responsibility, not just with the public sector officials, but with the residents and public that show up to this, the public sector officials need to know that residents are going to be held accountable for their participation. Now I'm going to close with this. Some of you know the story. This is a picture of me. I like to show pictures of me. Some of you know the story of the city of Bell. Who knows this story? National story. Incredible corruption was uncovered there 2 years ago on the front page of the LA Times. What the LA Times found was the city manager and several staff members in a weird collusionary relationship with the city council had essentially enabled everyone there to make at least 10 times the going rate for their positions. The city manager was making over $1 million a year with benefits. The police chief was making $450,000. All the city council members, where there's regulations that you can't make more than $12,000, 4 of the 5 city council members in Bell were making over $100,000 each a year. This is a city of 30,000 people, folks. Earlier this year, after the entire city council was swept out in a recall and new city staff was brought in, one of the first things that new city manager said was, we need to change the identity of the city, and we're going to do it through a public process around our budget. So this is a picture from the community center in the city of Bell. These are Bell residents. And in an amazing process, the city convened a series of public meetings where the public was invited to not only learn about the different elements of their budget, but some decisions that were going to need to be made with the upcoming 2012-2013 budget. And I want to close with this video. that gives you a very quick 1-minute overview of what happened that morning. Again, this was one of several public processes. I think we have that.
This is an historic event for the city of Bell. This is the first time that the community has any input in this kind of discussion where they have an input with the budget. This is what we want, a good, ethical, transparent government.
The city now is giving us the opportunity to be involved in the process.
The contributions that the city makes to the retirement, the disabilities, and those are huge.
My vision is that we would lead with the new council to a more transparent city process and local government where we could trust going forward.
And if you have trust, people can work together even when they have different ideas, and big problems can be solved.
Having a transparent government, ethical government is what is really needed in the whole state, not only in the city of Bell.
Now, I don't want to hear public engagement won't work in our town. If it can work in Bell, it can work anywhere. But it's so important that we go over, A, the reasons why we want to do this, understand the fear that's inherent based on real experiences that so many of these people that have had. These 3-minute and a microphone rant-a-thons, that is the picture that goes off in so many elected and public officials' heads. And working with them to say, this is not the way it has to be, that will be the thing. Those will be the relationships that can be made that will move this field forward. Thank you.